Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the KGBS webinar as part of our series, Sustainability and the Built Environment. My name is Nasrananda, and I'm the CEO of the Kenya Green Building Society. And this afternoon, our virtual panel session will be exploring the topic sustainability and the built environment in the context of unpacking the legal framework. The objective of this webinar is really to explore the intersection of sustainability and the legal frameworks that govern the built environment in Kenya, in particular, and of course, the wider Africa region. This is particularly important because, as you know, Africa is rapidly urbanizing. So the opportunities and the challenges that come with that are only going to increase. And with climate action being a focus, not just of governments, but investors, this is going to particularly be important as we unpack growing cities in the context of Africa and how the built environment can either support or harm Africa and African leaders achieving a legacy where no African gets left behind. So the discussion this afternoon really is about providing you, as our valued stakeholders, a platform to have a deeper understanding of the policies, regulations, and incentives that will shape sustainability in the context of the built environment in a practical way that will explore both real estate and infrastructure aspects of the built environment. And of course, people as well. And we're hoping that our speakers, who are experts in their own right, will also highlight the gaps and opportunities for legal reforms to support a sustainable urban future. My task this afternoon is to set the tone, which I'd like to think that I have, and of course, welcome our moderator, who will then introduce the panel. I'm hoping that at the end of this discussion and session, you as our valued participants will have a clearer understanding of the legal landscape and the practical issues plaguing the Kenyan market in shaping sustainable development in the Kenya built environment industry. And I'm also hoping that you will then be able to identify key areas of advocacy and legal reforms and understand the role of different stakeholders in supporting a sustainable and compliant built environment. And thereafter, in conclusion, hopefully create the networks that will support us in this journey. I'm pleased to let you know what is hot off the news is that Nairobi now has passed, and the governor has now assented the Nairobi City County Climate Change Management Bill into an act. I'm humbled to be part of that process, and really, I'm also asking and pleading with you all to support us as we now begin hitting the ground running in pushing for sustainability in Nairobi and Kenya. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce and pass on the mic to our moderator this afternoon, to Mr. Nation Okoa. Nation is a friend and a leader in this industry, and Nation has been very vocal in airing out issues that affect the built environment and is a seasoned advocate for sustainability in his own right. Nation, without further ado, may I please allow you to step in so that you can introduce our valued panelists for purposes of today's discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mheshimiwa Nasra, for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever you're joining us for this wonderful conversation by KGBS, a timely conversation that is well put and well seated for the built environment in Kenya, in the region, and probably in the continent. This is a conversation that we must have as an industry. I was glued to my screens this morning watching the floods devastation in Spain yesterday and today morning. And I was reminded about the floods we had in April. We seems to have forgotten about it already, but we had some serious flood. For a long time, nature has been whistling, but it's starting to scream. And the built environment is a big contributor to the nature beginning to scream. So it's important to have this conversation so that we begin to play our roles, whatever small or big spaces we live in or we work in, and see how do we build sustainably. This is a conversation that will not end with this webinar. It's one that we will continue to have, but personally one that I really is very dear to my heart because, ladies and gentlemen, the construction industry contributes a lot to our greenhouse, about 35%. Almost half of the world's raw material that is extracted goes to the construction sector. Yeah, about a third of the world waste comes from the business environment. We're at the core of the discussions on global warming. We are a big contributor as an industry. But how can we play a part in it? I think that is a key question we want to explore today. What can we do? Because it's almost starting to feel like sustainable development is becoming a cliche word. Should it be so? I don't think so. But what do we need to do? I think that is the lovely debate we're going to have in the next 40 or so minutes and explore what is available for us in the legal framework, what are the gaps, what are the incentives, and what are best practices, probably in the region or in the world, that Kenya needs to learn from. With that, we'll have a good base for future discussions and future conversations and future responsibility as people. So welcome very much. To help me explore this wonderful discussion, I have a very wonderful panel today. I'm going to introduce them. We have Paula Ochango. Paula Ochango is a seasoned legal profession with 6 years experience specializing in project development and project finance and infrastructure across multiple African markets. As a legal counsel at Mota Engil, Paul, allow me to skip the other part because I know it's Portuguese word. I don't want to pronounce it wrongly. She oversees legal matters from project inception to the financial close with a focus on drafting negotiations and risk mitigations. Her role involves managing the high-value contracts, engaging with financial institutions, and ensuring regulatory compliance across various sectors. She holds a Bachelor of Law from University of Nairobi, postgraduate diploma from Kenya School of Law, and she's a certified secretary under CASNEP. Paula currently serves as the company secretary on the board of Kenya Women and Children Wellness Center. Welcome, Paula, to this conversation. Our next panelist is Planner David Gatimu, who is not new. If you're active in the built environment, Planner Gatimu is not new. Should not be new to you. Planner Gatimu is a seasoned urban planner with over 30 years experience, spanning both the public and private sector. He holds a master's degree in urban planning from Oxford University. Planner David also has membership in various professional associations. He's a member of AAK, he's a member of KEEP, a member of Town and County Planners, a member of the County Planners Association of Kenya. Planner David has served in various capacities in the public. He has been assistant director of city planning in Nairobi, chief officer of lands at Kembu County. He has an elaborate CV. If you are in the planning space, then you know Planner David Katimu. He provides regular urban advisory to KEPSA, Land Sector Board, and serves on the National Physical Land Use Planning Liaison Committee as KEPSA representative. He has deep passion and commitment to entrench the influence of planning with defining characteristics of smart, resilient cities. Welcome so much, Planner David Gatimu. Next we have Eta Madete, architect Hector Madete. Eta is a Kenya housing developer, an architect, and a sustainable development expert. Passionate about systematic solutions to the housing crisis that embrace both affordability and sustainability. Eta is a licensed architect and has over 80 years experience in development, leading teams and managing projects, including Zimmer Homes, which is a 3 million age certified and gender inclusive housing development in Wangige, Kenya. She has experience working on portions of development cycle from fundraising, acquisitions, research, pre-development to design, construction, and delivery. Also published about advocacy, and she has worked at the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, taught at the University of Nairobi for 6 years, and has led published research and exhibitions locally, internationally, and internationally. Eta has an undergrad from UN, Architecture UN, and a master's in Sustainable Architecture UN, and has recently completed a master's in real estate from Harvard University. Our last speaker is Mr. Kennedy Madheka. Kennedy is currently working at the State Department of Public Works, serving as the Deputy Director, Building Safety and Quality Assurance. In addition, he coordinates climate change initiatives, working to integrate national climate change objectives in the building construction sector in Kenya. Member of the International Advisory for Flagship Initiatives under the One Planet Network, and represent Kenya in the Intergovernmental Council on Building and Climate. Kennedy also acts as the county focal officer for the Global Alliance for Building and Construction and Building Breakthrough Initiatives under the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, which aims to transform the built environment through sustainable building practices. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are our panelists today. I will love if they put their cameras on so that we can jump right into what we want to discuss today. Now, Etta, I want to start with you as we begin these conversations. You are an architect, a sustainable development expert, and a developer. My question to you as we begin this wonderful webinar is this: what are the key regulatory drivers of sustainability in the built environment? What are those things that you think are driving sustainability in our built environment currently, and how effective are these key drivers of sustainability in our industry?
Thank you, Nashan, and thank you for inviting me for this webinar. I'm going to actually answer your question by outlining some principles that we've learned at ZIMA, and how we can basically scale those for other people who want to participate in doing green building and trying to sort of lean into those regulatory frameworks and drivers that are driving sustainability in the built environment. So it'll give me 2 minutes and I'll share my screen. So if you can see my screen, Nashan, just give me a nod.
Yes, we can see your screen, Etta.
Okay, so Zima Homes is an affordable housing development in Wangige, Kenya, as shared. And our goal is to sort of create a world where there's scalable development of sustainable, affordable, and gender inclusive housing. We have done our first project, and now we're working on ways to scale and get the market to sort of adopt some of the principles we've learned so we can have a better urban environment. The project is about 140 homes selling between 1.5 million and 4 million, renting between 15,000 to 30,000. And basically, we're now looking at the next 500 homes within the next 5 years. As you can see there, there's 3 blocks. We have done 2 blocks due to handover in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And these are some of the internal environments that you can see, like the bedroom, the living area, following the principles which we'll discuss, natural lighting and ventilation, even in dense urban affordable housing projects. Other things that we've explored is incorporation of timber and bio-based materials within the project without compromising its financial viability, having natural elements like greenery that's incorporated into the design, and having an open courtyard, using light materials, making sure that you're using materials that can be easily maintained over time, which we'll discuss in a little bit. We've also explored a lot of alternative building materials. There's a pot and beam slab system, OSB particle boards for our recycled particle boards for our cabinetry. You can have here the Solaris Gate solar hot water, having a lot of gender inclusivity in the process, and experimenting with suppliers on how they can decarbonize some of their materials, but still remaining financially viable. That's the key thing. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We push them to say, you know what, if you want to be more sustainable, how does it work and still remain affordable? Those are some of the experiments we've done, including our duplexes on the top floor that have timber treads and also a prefabricated stair system that we worked with a supplier on that reduce the cost over time. So today, in answer to your question, we're going to look at green building sustainability and the legal framework that drives some of these regulatory frameworks. So the key aspect that we are pushing is that affordable typically does not equal sustainability. Sustainability has always been a purview of wealthy people with disposable income. And what I'm trying to sort of push for to say is that sustainability drives affordability. So as you're looking at the legal framework and regulatory area, think about how sustainability and green building can enable affordability and access. And there's 4 principles that we follow. One is making sure that you understand the entire value chain of delivery of green buildings and where the value is in sustainability. The second is not just thinking of green building as the sole cause, thinking about the ESG framework, which is environment, social, and governance, or systems, the community, and then segmentation. You've asked, what are the drivers? You've got to break down what it is you're looking for in green buildings. And the last is timing. So when you look at value in the value chain, I won't go into too much detail, but this is how you deliver projects. First, you start with where's the project, getting the permit, financing, design, build, occupancy. Then you transfer the project to a property. So you need to get tenants, collect the rent, pay your debt, hold the property, and then you need to have the owners, who's living there, the people who are buying and rental. So the drivers of sustainability and regulatory frameworks are in all these parts, and they're all segmented. So during the supply portion, there's things that need to be talked about in sustainability. That's the materials, the services that you're putting into place. On the demand side, there's things that need to be considered. Who is paying for those systems, and how are they paying for them over time? Like for power, if you're doing solar, for example. Another thing about the value is that there's not only, when you're doing a green building, it's not just trying to get information at the top level when you're coming up with the deal, but also when you're talking about the property management. So you've got to create a feedback loop from the residents in your building to the developer. This is not working. This is not helping me. This is not actually sustainable, all the way to the designers, all the way to the person making the next project deal. And most importantly, people living in the property need to be talking to the developers so that the next projects can get better. So having a proper value chain, and then ensuring that sustainability is not hindering or compromising housing affordability by making sure that you're thinking about the planet. Yes, trying to have good materials, healthy materials, but also people, who's going to use these materials, and the systems to maintain sustainability over time. Lastly, is that realizing that there's different components of the built environment that produced green building. So if you're looking for funding or financing, which is what the incentives are for, the transport sector, the building sector, there's operations, the operating of the building. Then there's the materials of the building. And then there's the internalized material, direct material, indirect materials of the building that comes from things like the transport sector, your life cycle analysis. So segmenting your type and then going for requests that you can handle when you're doing projects. Lastly, when you're looking at the 3 parts of a building, the materials that you're using, that's like, where do they come from? How are they maintained in the long run, and who uses them? Second is the services, water, energy, waste. And then this is not to do with operations. So it might not necessarily be at the onset, but more in the property management. And then lastly, who is going to be making the decisions, whether it's the materials or in the services? When are they making that decisions? When do they pay for it? And segmenting that part. And the last point is timing is key. Right now, you're talking about, sustainability is a buzzword. It is. And there's things that are being put in place that are creating sticks. So people are being given the carrot and the stick. So be sustainable because you'll get better financing, but also be sustainable or the government will not give you permits. And the baselines keep increasing. So in 10 years' time, your green building will just be a normal regulatory word. So you need to make sure that you're setting up your green building now to be able to benefit from incentives in future, as well as to sort of prevent your building being outdated in the long run. And to do that, you need to, first of all, have low-hanging fruit. So there are things that you can do now that don't necessarily cost more. And then the other one is having design decisions right now that can then push against any legal remediation that will be done in future that will make your building redundant. And then when you're thinking about a portfolio, prepping it in advance to absorb the legal requirements that will be put on us for sustainability in future. So I don't know if that sort of answers all your questions, but it gives a framework to discuss the approach with which we take at Zima Homes to prepare the market to do green buildings as a need be, but also as a way to scale over time.
Okay. Thanks, I think I picked affordability is not equivalent to sustainability. But let me ask, based on your experience, because are we pushing too much? I mean, for global South countries like ours, third world countries, probably don't even have housing. In its, we have deficit of housing. Is it too early to talk about sustainability? That is why we can't be sustainably. How effective are these drivers? You've listed them at different stages, supply and all that, but how effective are they?
You're right. I call it the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's all well and good that the West is now embracing sustainability, but right now we're barely industrialized. We've barely gotten through some of the issues that we're facing as a nation: health, basic income. So why are we being pushed to sort of do something which we are not even, the basic framework is not even there. And so for me, I think the segmentation is so important, because you're not telling people who are trying to supply housing, which is what we need, that they must do affordable housing because it's the right thing to do. No, you're telling them, but if you supply affordable housing, you can actually supply more, and you can also have less costs. So I think the key thing is the language that we're using, and the key thing is to again not frame it in a way that it's sort of saying that if you don't do it, you're doing the wrong thing. It's not, there's nothing wrong with building housing that is just going to provide shelter. The thing is to say, you know what, there's actual benefits to your owner, to your financial, to your bottom line, to going through the green building. And the only way to do that is by making sure that you're engaging with the more detailed nuances of green buildings. And that's why even for me, sustainability, green buildings, it is a buzzword. Be more specific. Are you talking about renewable energy in the built environment? Are you talking about material decarbonization in the built environment? Are you talking about trying to incorporate better, greener sewage systems? So like in my mind, you can't tackle the whole thing. You can't just be green or sustainable. Everyone needs to have much more specific language and say, you know what, I'm trying to tackle X, Y, Z. And this is then where that is happening. So the drivers and the legal regulatory framework is helping, but I think it can be much more specific. And anyone who wants to engage needs to basically choose that battle and then sort of do it step by step. And you'll find that everyone will feel like they can participate and not have to be subject to, I will be sustainable when X, Y, Z happens.
We need to be more specific. I think that is the word that I've taken from you. We are using this word so generally. We are not specific enough. Thanks, Etta, for that wonderful presentations. Paula, let me come to you. Legal frameworks. I think, talk to us about the laws. What do we have under the laws? Mheshimiwa Nasta has talked about the county has enacted a new law. I know in 2021, Uhuru signed the Sustainable Waste Management Act in 2021. What laws do we have around this sustainability? The building code is being lauded as one of most progressive in that area. Some would agree, some would not. Talk to about the available legal framework. Do we have a proper legal framework to tackle sustainability, and how specific are these legal frameworks?
Thank you very much, Nashon, for that introduction, and thank you to the KGBS Society for facilitating this very exciting conversation. To answer your question, Kenya has a very robust legal and regulatory framework as pertains to sustainability in the built environment. For purposes of this discussion, I will just limit myself to the key legislations, because you'll notice that most laws in Kenya are scattered across different legislations. So for purposes of this discussion, I will limit myself to the main ones. First and foremost, the highest law of the land, which is the Constitution. The government of Kenya is mandated under the Constitution to conserve the environment. Article 60, 66, and 69 provides provisions on ensuring that the environment is maintained sustainably, and proper principles are applied in utilization and management of the environment. And then going lower in the hierarchy of laws, we have the EMCA, the Environmental Management Coordination Act, which establishes the body that we all know as NEMA, the National Environmental Management Authority, which is the principal instrument of government that implements all policies to do with the environment. EMCA also sets out provisions on conservation of the environment by owners, developers, and occupiers of buildings. It also sets out the National Environmental Tribunal, which has the power to hear cases or appeals that come from pronouncements of NEMA. Lastly, but not the least, we have the offenses, environmental offenses set out under the Environmental Management and Coordination Act. So basically, the offenses that are provided under the Act, and they are penalties and sometimes even prison sentences to persons who violate those offenses. Going on to the Physical Land Use Planning Act, PLUPA, which is an act that makes provisions on planning, use, and regulation on development of land. Under Section 61 of PLUPA, it says that when a county executive committee member is considering an application for a development permission, they have to take into account community facilities, environmental, and other social amenities in the area where the development permission is being sought. So you see that in granting one of these main licenses, the PLUPA mandates the county executive committee members to grant licenses in a manner that integrates economic and social and environmental needs of present and future generations. I'll also talk about the Climate Change Act, which there was a recently enacted climate change carbon markets regulations in 2024 June. This act has the objective of creating a framework for implementation of carbon projects. It also creates incentives for supporting greenhouse emissions reductions, and also gives guidance on annual social contributions for carbon projects. So we'll talk about the incentives later, but you'll see from the Climate Change Act, this already provided for under the law. Lastly, but not the least, to mention the National Building Code, which has been subject to a lot of conversation and controversy. The National Building Code was enacted under the National Construction Authority Act. It is a regulation that replaces a very archaic law, which, believe it or not, we have been operating on since 1968. So there is room for improvement. There's been a lot of discussions on the code, but I think it's a welcome move because it introduces issues such as sustainability, green building, and climate change. So other than this act, the acts that I've mentioned, Kenya also ratifies international treaties like the Paris Agreement and most recently the Middle East Green Initiative, which aligns the country's policies with global climate actions. So I've mentioned just but a few. There are a few scattered legislations on sustainability mentioned in different laws, like the County and Urban Planning Acts, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, and several others. We definitely have some way to go, but these acts set the stage for this discussion. And I would like to say that it's one thing to have these provisions on paper and having the provisions actually implemented. And I think this is a good place to move back the mic to you, Nashon.
Okay, wonderful. If someone dropped today, Paula, and had you elaborate the kind of regulations we have in this country as regards sustainable development, probably if that person is not all there in Kenya, they may think probably in some European country. Because I mean, our practice, I've been here, this is my 14th year. And that will take me to my senior planner, David. Why are we not building sustainably? Because if we have such Article 60, Article 69, MCA, Sustainable Waste Management, building code recently speaks about all this sustainable development. Why are we not building sustainably? What are our challenges? I'll come to Paula on the gaps in the legal framework. But Planner Gatimu, what is the problem? We seem, from what Paula says, that we have quite elaborate legislation and regulations that should allow us to build sustainably, but we are not. If you look at even the affordable housing projects we are doing, government should be the omnipresent teacher that teaches everyone. Look at this kind of projects. Are they sustainable? I don't think so. What is the challenge? What is the problem? If we have regulation and legislation, why are we not building sustainable? Planner Gatimu, you have served in government a lot. Probably you have some insights.
Thank you very much, Kenya Green Building Society, for organizing this, and thank you, Nation. Thank you, Eta and Paula, for what you presented just before me. To start responding to your question, that's a very difficult question. Why we are not having sustainable development happen in Kenya, and there are quite a number of reasons. There are some which I can attribute to institutional frameworks. There are some which I can attribute to societal attitudes, amongst others. But let me start from the legal perspective, because laws are made to be pursued and to be observed and to be followed to ensure that sustainability takes place. And we are living in very interesting times because if I may start from a planning point of view, planners, we look into people. When we plan, the first thing we look is people. We look also into the resources, and we also look into the space. Perhaps one of the reasons why people are not complying to sustainability issues is because of the competing interests in the spaces that we are having. If planning is not finding its space in terms of ensuring that there are legal and policy frameworks that address those challenges, then you're bound to find those problems. And if I may begin by highlighting some of the legal challenges we've been having. In the last 15 years or so, when we've been going through devolution, we have a number of laws that, and Paula has mentioned quite a number, but one critical one, which came in very belatedly, is the Physical and Land Use Planning Act, PLUPA, which came into being in 2019. And 2 years later, it had about 16 regulations to go with it. And if today you may ask any person sitting in government what these entail, it's not easy. 16. And they're still coming out because we had the building code coming out, I think, a few months ago, and it's going to be rolled out in March next year. So those are some of the gaps you can say have been there, in that we are having so many things moving too fast, but there could be some lack of sensitization and ensuring that the institutions that are supposed to ensure that that happens, bring them on board. And I can give an example. Some of the sustainability issues that require to be put in place are supposed to be done within the frameworks of municipalities, because here we are talking about governance at the lowest level. Municipalities, as we know them, the way they used to be before the new constitution, are the ones who should deal with issues about environment, public health, amongst others. How many municipalities do we have in Kenya today? I don't think there are as many as you would expect relative to the urbanization levels we're in. How many policies do we have that are supposed to drive? And I can give a very good example of Nairobi, which takes the lead. And Nasra mentioned about an act that has been enacted by the governor. I think she mentioned about Climate Change Action Act. But I also need to ask, within the policy framework of Nairobi, how many plans do we have? And as stipulated in the Physical and Land Use Planning Act, we don't have a county spatial plan. We don't have local plans as yet. And yet these are the ones which are supposed to be drivers because it's supposed to be institutional and also from the community point of view. So those gaps that exist between the institutional frameworks that are supposed to drive the delivery of the legal frameworks are missing. So I think that's why we need to go back and have those institutions being put in place to ensure that things happen properly. And I'm glad Nasra, who is here, who sits in the county assembly, and also who sits at the KGBS, and also deals a lot of with the neighborhood associations, we'll find that as we speak, you'll find there are so many neighborhood associations that are feeling sustainability matters are missing. And they're trying to put the county government to account on many matters. So it's a question of identifying which laws do we have to ensure that laws and policies, and I'll give an example of Nairobi. Nairobi needs to put itself in a position where it has all the policies, right from the county level all the way to the local level, to ensure that even the community are getting involved in ensuring this compliance. So those are some of the things that we need to address to ensure that it is not one-sided. It should be the same coin having the two sides, both public and the private. May I stop there so that you can give an opportunity for the next contributor? Thank you. Nashon, you're muted. You're muted, Nashon.
Thanks, Planner. Thanks, Planner David. Sorry for that. I hear you, and I think you have leaned so much into the aspect of pointing. One of the big challenges we have is too many regulations. I didn't know. In fact, I want to check it out. This Plupa has 16 regulations so far, and yes, the building code is coming in February. So you've leaned towards we don't have a county special plan, land use plans, and all that are some of the gaps, challenges that we are facing. Let me come to Mr. Madheka. Mr. Madheka, now you sit in the, let me get it right. You represent Kenya in the Intergovernmental Council on Buildings and Climate. That's a very lofty position in my view. What in your view is the challenges? What challenges do we face as an industry or as a country as pertains sustainability or sustainable development? Why can't we build sustainably? Everyone is talking about this. It's becoming a cliche. It's becoming a buzzword in the industry. Everyone it's on edge on talking about green building and all that. But we are not building sustainably. Look at our projects around the city. We are in fact utterly careless in how we're developing. What is the problem? We seem to have good regulations. Planner Gatimu says there are certain gaps in those regulations. In your view, what are the challenges why we cannot build sustainably?
Thank you, Nashon, and thank you, my colleagues, panelists, and everyone from KGBS who is here today. It is true that all the issues that my colleagues have said really bedevils our sector. And on matters buildings, and not just on issues relating to sustainability, I think you may be aware that the conversation started up when we talk about the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement is a global commitment for various parties, where Kenya is one, on ways of how to mitigate issues of climate change into the various sectors. When this conversation was happening, for us as a country to even have our agreement, what we call the nationally determined contributions, this was way back, and the conversation was actually happening between 2015 to thereabout up to 2016. I can attest that between that time, this kind of conversations within our sector was missing, and that when the country realized the first intended, nationally determined contributions, then much within the building space was left out. And that's why you see some other sectors are quite active, talking about transport, talking about energy and the rest. So the better part of the global picture of where we should be in terms of realizing the roadmap, then Kenya, especially within the building sector, found itself off from the conversation. And I believe that is when then other sectors picked up, what should be done. And part of that was picked was within our sector. And NDC itself is an opportunity for not just a country, but for a sector. So what we are having in terms of the goings, whether they're in various ministries or the various state agencies and the rest, is that, yes, we have one objective of realizing a green economy as a country, but then you find overlay in some of these state actors. A case in point is what Paula has talked about, the kind of regulations that we have. There are quite a number. All of them strive as much as possible to find space in the building area. And I always say buildings are actually what we call the last mile. You know, all efforts done in the energy sector, all efforts going to the water sector, then finds itself into the livable space. And this is only in the building sector. So you realize that from the supply side of it to us in the demand side of it, then there may be some conflicts in terms of, overlaps and such. Whereas we're also looking at how best, even as a sector, then can coordinate this kind of conversation. And therefore, one, we are very keen to get it right in the next NDC review. I think you're aware that the country is supposed to submit a revised nationally determined contributions next year. So for us in the building sector, we are keen to consolidate and give a clear roadmap on how we should mainstream all these issues of climate change into this sector. And therefore, using that overarching framework, all regulations or acts of parliament that needs to be harmonized for us to speak as one, then shall follow suit. Nevertheless, I think you are aware at the same time, when we are talking about, the nationally determined contributions, even our sector for the first time has moved at a global level, so that we also learn the best global practices that have been happening out there. How we ended up as a country to be part of the Intergovernmental Council for Buildings and Climate was that there was a national call to have countries come together so that they champion the issues relating to building and construction sector. And that's how Kenya found itself in the first place, pitching and being part of the Global Alliance for Building and Construction. That is where you have, countries come together, whether they're in African context or even in Asia or even other places. And I can assure you that Kenya participation at that level is very key. In the process, then it gave birth to the council. And the reason why all this is happening is that, one, Kenya is very strategic in its own self. And part of the strategic intervention that we are keen on is how best we can grow our private sector. Our private sector remain the key in realization of intentions, whether it is under investments, whether it is opportunities for our consultants and such. And therefore, as we strive to lead in the region, then we should be finding ourselves as a country or as a sector in the right group. And this conversation has been very strategic even out there, and that most countries really embrace and support most of the initiatives that we are keen on. I'm privy to the various legislations, national legislations that we have, but as much as possible, we are finding ourselves going deeper to even, looking at the existing legislations in other sectors, whether it is the energy sector, whether it is in the water sector, whether it's in the transport sector, how best the building sector can find space into this, aware that we need to harmonize, all these conversations. Besides that, we still have other commitments. And part of these commitments are not legally binding in the first place. Let me start from that. And that it's a way of giving extra opportunities. And I believe for the last 2-3 years, we have been very much intentional in terms of learning from what other related sectors have been doing. And therefore, our building and construction sector then should tap in the opportunities that we have. When you talk about certification of buildings, as a country, you're all aware that this is a process. And part of this process entails the material value chain processes. We're talking about building up extra skills and scaling up knowledge for professionals and such, even realization of the intentions of all these acts and regulations that we have just talked about. And therefore, we are aware of the gaps, we are aware of the opportunities, and that this is what we call an intentional one government approach, so that even our professionals in the energy sector, even our professionals in the water sector, then should harmonize and realize that we all need to have one seamless opportunity by the end of the day. And therefore, this kind of conversation also puts us as professionals and as practitioners on the front line. I've liked the kind of presentation and even what Madeta said and even presented, because our role as the ministry is basically two. One is to coordinate the sector activities, in this case, the building and construction. But we don't coordinate for ourselves. We coordinate for the private sector, so that we thrive. And we'll be keen to see how now even the green building space contribute in terms of the economic value of this country. So part of the economic value is summing up with, the issues relating to green jobs, talking about the sustainable material supply process, talking about the benefit to the professionals who are in this area. And therefore, these are the things that we want to see moving forward, such that if we ever sit on the table and we are asked how much do green buildings contribute to the national economy, then we are able to, authoritatively confirm that indeed this is a good initiative within the building sector that is growing up and giving opportunities to our people, bringing better opportunities even to the nation at large. And therefore, I feel there is need for us to continue having these conversations. Every opportunity in relation to any regulation that comes on board is almost welcome, but there's one regulation that I'll be keen on in terms of, relaying this message. National Treasury recently coordinated the development of what we call the National Green Incentive Policy. The National Green Incentive Policy is a turnaround strategy of how various sectors spread from water to infrastructure to health and all such, how best these sectors can be incentivized to realize green buildings or to realize the green economy agenda. This is one area that is very key in terms of how we can support, especially the private sector investments into the conversation. We have our fair share of what we are supposed to do as a sector, and that each of those kind of incentives that have been provided for, or even ways of enforcements, then creates business opportunity for us, and they should also be read together with the existing legislations from where all those incentives have been listed. And therefore, looking at the whole space, these regulations don't exist to punish us. They exist to complement our efforts, to bring them forward. And by the way, every time we have a regulation in place, let's find an opportunity to go through it. Every regulation is subject to be reviewed once in every, you can even initiate a proposal for each year. And therefore, I feel there is an opportunity for all of us, even to better these regulations. We talked about the building code. I believe by now you are aware that there are gaps in the building code, and the intention of the building code was not to carry everything. We have an opportunity of greening the building code. We have an opportunity of even creating a building code that is even more resilient in its own self. So this is a work in progress, but we believe that as we move forward, some of these regulations can be bettered up, and we are the people to better these regulations up. We are the people to bring ideas on how best each of these components can be, with a view of promoting and having business opportunity and investment to our people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Madeka. And you bring in a point that is very important: incentives. And I want to come to you, Etta. Are we fighting a losing war? It's something I keep asking myself over and over. Should we wait until we as a people are in a stage where we probably have a food on our table, we have houses for our people, then begin to talk about sustainably? Because we have these regulations, but there's no enforcement of this. But let me talk to us about incentives. You are the brain behind Zima Homes. What drove you to this kind of sustainable development away from the mainstream developers who are just after the bottom line, the bottom number? Talk to us about incentives. What incentives exist? Madeka says there's a national green incentive policy. I've heard it for the first time, and I believe I'm one of the best readers in this industry, but I have it for the first time. What are these incentives? Is it that we don't know about them as a people? That's why we don't explore them. Talk to us about incentives.
Thank you. I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, we can.
So you're right. As I've always said, I think green building should be a subset of sustainable development. Sustainable development does not necessarily mean green building. It just means that can what we're building sustain not just our generation, but generations to come in future. So if you think about green building as a subset of sustainability, and think of sustainability as not just something to do with trying to make the planet better, but something that basically says this is something that doing things in a way that is better, not just for our generation, but for future generation. So as you've just said, if you're a developer and your main goal is to make money within the next 3 years, if there's any developers in the room, you'll realize that even that 3 years, you won't make money. Projects take time, properties last for generations, and cities last forever. So if you do not think about your development and your housing and your building as an asset that needs to add an increase in value over time, then it means that you're basically trying to make a quick buck. And the ones who try to make a quick buck, usually either they run away, they lose money. And so even in development and green building, sustainability ingrains in you to build something that is valuable. And so for me at Zima, we sort of said, let's start with, it needs to remain affordable. It needs to sort of use the baseline behavior, but that sustainability is actually going to make us money over time. And sort of having that as a mindset helps you to sort of distinguish it from something that will cost you. But of course, it means that you have to think about portfolio level growth, not just project by project growth. So if people who are the main, and including like, for example, the government, private sector, parastatals who are developing like SACCOs and pension funds, if you think about portfolio development, sustainability is just a no-brainer. If you're just thinking at project by project, that's the baseline number you're looking at, then yes, you can be nitty-gritty about plus or minuses of integrating some of these things. And to your second question, is it a pipe dream? Are we putting the cart before the horse? I always feel like in Africa and in Kenya and in Nairobi, we have a sustainable mindset, even if it's not called that. We're like the number of people who drive in Nairobi is actually very few. There are very few cars in Nairobi, less than 5 million in the whole country. And if you do that kind of math, it means that many people are walking, they are cycling. And maybe, yes, if the economy sort of miraculously changes, people will buy cars. But I think it's much more, it's different than that. People do live in a sustainable, people are always trying to save money in power bills, in their water, etc. People are very conscious about energy, about water conservation. And so it's about leaning into our already known practices and then enhancing it by making it easier for people to live more sustainably. So I think it's the way that the language that we use. I always use an example of Western Kenya. There's a company called Solar King. And every time I go home, by the way, most of Western is powered by solar. No one is putting it on the map. Nobody is advertising it. But somebody in the village in a hut is being given this solar panel that can do everything in their and they can pay over time and they don't have to pay power. It's a no-brainer. And so I think we have to sort of, as professionals, we don't need to make it so complicated that we are selling something that is out of this world. In the legal framework, etc., it's good. It's creating a carrot and a stick. But if you look at an example in New York, they currently put like a green building minimum. And all the landlords in New York had to fight that bill because it made their projects and their real estate lose value, because it means that you've basically outdated the existing buildings. So it's not a problem that is just for developing countries. In developed countries, green building and sustainability does not work with the existing systems. So I think for us in Kenya and Nairobi, what I believe are two things to help. One is that we live sustainably anyway. Let's go back to that and then reflect that in a more in a simple way. And we recycle naturally. You may not have many colorful bins, but whatever goes into our bins is recycled, believe it or not. And so it's like leaning into the existing way of living And then the second is, let's not just brush it as, this is a one-time thing, a one-deal thing. Projects, properties, portfolios, good quality buildings, good cities take time, require multiple people to be playing. So I'm not just going to say I'm building a green building and I've saved the world. No, my neighbor has to build something that's green. The street has to have some elements of green. The sewage system that I'm pouring into has to also. So like everyone is interconnected in the city. So we're not living in silos. The government is also trying to do something. So can we bring all these initiatives together and not live in silos? And what I said before, which is let's be specific, and let's be specific so that people know what it is you're talking about when you're talking about green or sustainable development.
Well thought through, Etta. Thank you for highlighting that. And I can resonate with the sunken solar issue. It's also conquered my village as well. So and it's doing a lot of miracles in the western side of Kenya. Paula, in 2 minutes, the gaps. What are the legal gaps that we have? I remember there's this energy, I think it was the Energy Act in 2012, 2013, I think 2012, that was lauded that time as was bringing solar for new projects, blah, blah, blah. Every project was to have solar water heating systems. It flopped. The law is there, it flopped. They gave a route of you can apply, blah, blah. There's a lot of gaps in that energy. I think it's the Energy Act 2012. What are the gaps that we have in the legal frameworks? I know Planagatimu tried to mention some of them, but in your perspective in 2 minutes, what are the gaps? Where can we strengthen in our legal framework so that we tighten the noose a bit on building sustainably?
Thanks, Nashon. You've given me a very hard task to summarize something that I could talk about for a day in 2 minutes, but I'll try my best. I think very quickly, with the existing legal framework, there are some things that we can actively work on reforming. Number one is education. As Maveka had mentioned, and David Gatim, I think, had alluded to this as well, there are numerous legislations, hundreds, if you will, but not many professionals who deal in the built environment know what these legislations are, know where to get these legislations. We have the Kenya Law Reports has a very good website, and they've recently updated their website to be more user-friendly, where you can just go and look at any law and just type anything, and at the touch of a button, you can be able to see what laws are existing for what sector. So education and awareness of the professionals in the built environment is key in moving this discussion forward. Next, I think, is inclusivity. We have talked about the building code, and we know that there's some very good provisions that were put in there to move with the changing times. But I feel like some professionals that have been locked out, and they contribute to sustainability in the built environment. They have not made mention about interior designers, construction managers, and these are players who do play a key role in the built environment. So just ensuring inclusivity by the relevant professionals in the legal framework. And then lastly, I will talk about codifying some of these practices into law. I want to give an example of the Rwanda Building Code, which I believe is a best practice that we can borrow a lot from. The Rwanda Building Code was enacted in 2019, and it establishes a minimum compliance system. So any developer has to kind of tick some boxes and performance indicators in order to receive a license to build. So there are basic things like ventilation, natural lighting, things that may not even cost so much, but you have to kind of tick these boxes in order for you to get a license. The score is 60 out of 190, and any building indicator has a score attached to it based on how much you put in as a developer. So putting those things into law so that you're not now following up on buildings that are already existing that are not in compliance, but ensuring that these are done even before the building is put up. I think that's something that we can borrow from.
Paula, thank you very much. In fact, I owe you lunch. There's something you mentioned about the code. I will not repeat it. It's on the record. But I think the first thing you mentioned, which is very important, education. And I think it's something. It's someone told me we need to make sustainable development engraved in our education, like we did with the HIV and all those things in the early childhood education that people had. In fact, in university, it's also almost a mandatory course, common course. So I think education plays a big part. A lot of what we are talking about here, many people do not know about. And I think when we begin to educate our people right from down all the way up to us who are practicing, then we begin to be informed about what we need to do. And you mentioned Rwanda building code, amazing building code, by the way. And I think the Ghana one as well is quite elaborate with specificity. Apla Negativo, I'll come to you, then go to Madeka as we begin to wind down. In 2 minutes, talk to us. I know you worked in government, you also practice in the private sector. What role can the private sector play? I know we like complaining, pointing finger at government and all these things. What role do we play in the private sector? We who are constructing and building and practicing in the built environment. What is our role? How can we help advance this discussion on sustainable development?
Yeah, thank you very much. The private sector has a very big role to play in ensuring this proper coordination and delivery of sustainability. And being the driver of the economy, they hold a very important position in holding the government to account. And I can give a very good example of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance with their various sector board arrangements internally who have frequent interactions with the government on matters to do with development. And I think this has been able to bring out many issues that are supporting development. As we speak, I know there are quite a number of incentives that have been taken up by KEPSA, including its bodies like the Kenya the Kenya Private Developers Association, in ensuring that the government is held to account to ensure that it abides by what is required. But I would like to take something that Kennedy mentioned earlier about coordination, which I think the private sector has also been trying to put across. There are laws and regulations that are churned out by the government, but they lack a very good coordinating mechanism. And if I may give an example of the building code cuts across many sectors where you find developers have to abide by it as they do the developments. And Etta here may confirm so. As a developer and as an architect, she can be able to see it from all those sides. But you find the building code was enacted under the National Construction Authority, the NCA Act. Whereas the county governments plays a very big role in giving permits, yet the building code is very, very critical in that performance. And he mentioned about the national green initiative that is being done by the National Treasury. And here again, I said, we are having yet another initiative being done by the National Treasury. And when it comes to things that are the bottom line, things like the carbon credits, how do you ensure those incentives find their way into the county government policies? And I think that's why the private sector comes in to say that, yes, they're being bombarded from all directions, from the National Treasury, from the national government, from the county government. But when you look into who coordinates, where do we end up getting all this being, as Paula said, where do you get these indicators being taken on board to ensure that there's compliance? So I think the private sector needs to come out very clearly to ensure that there's proper coordination, regardless of where some of these regulations and policies are coming from, because eventually they have to serve the common mwananchi. So I think there's a very important role that the private sector is playing. And Nasra, who's seated here, has also been putting the county government to account. I wonder how she balances the two of them, where she's a very good actor when it comes to matters of activism, especially in the built environment matters, and identifying areas where the politicians or the managers, the policymakers, are supposed to ensure that they streamline all these put together. So I believe the private sector, KEPSA, and I've made mention of it several times, and neighborhood associations, people who are the grassroots, who enjoy or who really suffer from issues that we are discussing here. So neighborhood associations, and I believe Nairobi has a neighborhood engagement act that I wonder whether it has been put into effective use. Kiambu the same. Eta, you could confirm whether when you're putting up your development in Wangige, whether that was really put in place. And perhaps when it comes to issues of infrastructure, and maybe I would like to challenge and ask Eta, Kiambu, one of the areas where we are having a deficiency in terms of provision of infrastructure, and I've seen you put a very, very heavy development there. For sustainability, you require to have a very good infrastructure plan in place to ensure that you're able to get sufficient water, sufficient management of the solid liquid waste. And if there are multiple developments, as you are doing, you from the private sector side, you're supposed to put pressure. You're supposed to come up very clearly. And I can give you one area which actually is provided for in the Physical Land Use Planning Act, Section 63, that allows the county executive member to come up with the regulations that are supposed to support funding of infrastructure as part of the development control processes. For the development Zima that you put up there, I don't know how much liquid waste you are generating, how much solid waste you're generating, yet there's supposed to be a public good element where the county government is supposed to come up with supporting infrastructure for that kind of development and the multiple developments that are going to happen around there. So there are so many gaps which I can say, Eta, from the private sector point of view, maybe you could let us know what role are you playing to ensure that the county government is held accountable for those social goods that they ought to be providing or coordinating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Planaga team. I don't know you've been asked some questions, but I believe they're rhetorical. I believe they're rhetorical, something to clash our head about. We're running out of time, so I want to go to Madheka. Then we'll have like a 10 or so minutes questions. Then I will hand the mic back to KGBS. Kennedy, are we on the right track? Honestly, looking at our legislation, looking at our challenges, looking at where we are currently. I mean, we have these legislations and regulations, and more are still coming. Are we on the right track as a country, as an industry, or should we pause? Should we begin to pause and reflect and head back to Bomas and have serious discussions on what do we need to do as an industry? Probably combine these legislations and regulations and have a document that people can adopt. I mean, I don't know. In your view, are we on the right track as a country in this issue of sustainable development?
Yes, let me say yes, we are, because whether we are on track or not, you look at it at the human resource part of it. You also read between the opportunities part of it and whether we can account for those opportunities that we have. In terms of human resource and capacities, and even financial and otherwise, we are on track, because if you look at this kind of a conversation we're having today, and this is just one of the many that we have been having, we are looking at a case in point that our professionals are learning, our professionals are part of this conversation. We're also seeing this turning out to be opportunity in terms of investments. We have multilaterals and multinationals who have an interest in this kind of conversations that we are having, in this kind of investments that we are having. We have projects of national strategic importance. These are Tatu City, these are Konza City, we have other technopolis cities that are coming up. And our intention is to see that as we build capacity, we build our internal capacity as a country, then and create business opportunity, then the existing and enabling legislations then corresponds into this conversation. And therefore, in terms of opportunity, in line with investments, you are aware that we are running away from what we call business as usual. Yeah, even at our industrial level, that we are embracing technology, we are embracing new systems, and we are embracing the issues relating to sustainability, even at operations level. So we are turning our country, not just in the building sector, but in various sectors put together into one day be a green economy. And therefore, when the country has that green industrialization strategy or the green building strategy or sustainable strategy or such, the purpose is that as a country by the year 2030, we shall all have a conversation and see whether each of these sectors, including buildings, are on the right track. So all these efforts that you see in terms of legislations and enabling environments is to see that while we do our evaluation as a country by the year 2030, have we got it right in terms of learning? And by the way, because we are talking about some learnings here, we have a Kenya National Climate Change Learning Strategy of the year 2021 to 2030. It requires every sector, including the building and construction sector, to mainstream this kind of trainings and learnings that we are even doing here in our universities and our tertiary institutions. So this kind of trainings that we are doing here, we are supposed to build a population or a generation that is coming up or is undergoing this kind of learnings. And there's an enabling specific legislation or a strategy that guides each of these sectors. But then if you read the strategy, it doesn't go to detail of how we'll do it in our area. It is upon us as people in that profession, as well as the way the agriculture people are doing, the way energy people are doing and others. It is upon us to advise and see another sitting and see our universities, start mainstreaming and revising their curricula to start training in these areas. So as a country, we are looking at it that we have several spheres that we are looking at, whether it is at the training level, whether it is those of us in the industry level, and what we should do. And that's why you are seeing most of these legislations coming up. Some of them in terms of, the updates are coming up in form of amendments. And even the new legislations that are coming up, they are not just business as usual. These are legislations in any sector that have, the greener and resilient components in them and sustainability. So the intention is that we all have a responsibility, whether we are in the industry and even at the production level and our trade, and even the component around material production. There is a lot of change that is going on, and all this change is geared towards ensuring that we harness sustainability into this conversation. And I believe part of the learning will also go to, learning from our neighbors, how the way Madeta said in terms of even Rwanda and other, Paula has said about Rwanda and the rest. If we find an opportunity within our neighbors, then we are the people to mainstream those kind of good practices into our sector in Kenya by practice, by training, and by action. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I have run out of time. This is a conversation for a whole week. You can do a conference on this thing for a whole week, and we will not be able to exhaust. But I think we have highlighted the issues. My plea will be to KGBS. If time allows, let us pick each of these areas in subsequent conversations next year and begin to exploit them individually so that we can have an elaborate discussion. We haven't talked about best practices in depth, for example, in the region. I know Paula has mentioned the issue of Rwanda, approving buildings on checking points on sustainability. We in Nairobi are approving buildings a lot of time based on the size of your pocket. We are in the same region. It's world apart. We need to have these deeper conversations as an industry. And if you allow us in subsequent webinars, please organize a series of this so that we can exploit each of these areas. There's education part. A lot of what Madeka has talked about. Trust me, most people don't know these things. We don't even know they exist. A lot of practitioners in the built environment don't understand these laws. Yes, it is them who are supposed to implement and ensure they are done. So we need to have subsequent webinars. That's my plea to Nazra. next year, let's have an elaborate discussion on these topics and pick each area. Gaps in legislation, challenges, incentives that are existing. What is our problem? Is it culture? Is it cost? Okay. Are we just framed to believe this thing is expensive? Or is it that too premature discussion for us? We are barely putting food on the table. What is the problem with us? I want to end it there, and hopefully we'll have subsequent conversations on this and hand it back to KGBS. I'll allow Mheshimiwa Nasra to. I know you are mentioned extensively. You can respond, then hand it back to your team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope listeners learned a thing or two. I definitely did. I see there are a number of questions and comments made on the chat, so I'm really glad to know that people were engaged throughout. This was an exciting and informative session. So thank you so much, guys, for giving us your time. And to start off by answering your question, Nashan, I think number one, yes, this will be continued next year. We'll pick up this conversation and unpack it in different ways. There's a lot really to discuss, from incentives to the law, and also just looking at projects from end to end. I know, Nashan, you as a project manager in particular, have emphasized this time and again that it's such an important part of a project, but often in a market that's reactive, this is taken for granted unless a problem occurs. And that's human nature. But yeah, to kick off, yes, we will be having this conversation next year. So guys, stay tuned. We'll be communicating the same once we share our calendar for next year. I think I want to start off by first saying to my senior, Planner Gatimu, who has a lot of experience even within Nairobi. Just to clarify a few things, Nairobi County actually, so Nairobi County actually does not have regulations, and this is where I really need your support. My biggest challenge has been that once the bylaws lapsed, we've been operating on a free-for-all. And as you know, with a free-for-all setting, you have rogue players, people who know to play around with gaps. And my part is really to see how I can bring you all in as players who are doing your respective parts to change the market. So from my perspective, and I happen to chair actually the Delegated County Legislation Committee, and I will be sending out letters in my other hat requesting you and other partners within the industry now to facilitate, number one, capacity building sessions, to unpack regulations in different areas. And the aim for that is, and I'm putting it out there, I guess if there's family from county, you will hear it from me. We need sanity in this industry. Just the other day, I was fighting some rogue developers on the field, and I had to get a rungu, and that's just giving you insights to what I had to do on ground, because there was a character who had a fake Nairobi County ID, and it wasn't until they knew I was an MCA that the truth came out that they were actually not from Nairobi County. So there's so many challenges really, but there's also an opportunity, a huge one. So one, if we as professionals in this segment just choose to take up the responsibility to say, these are 5 priorities for the first half of 2025, and then kind of create sessions around that, we'll be able to move things forward. On my part as an MCA, I will be looking at partners who I can collaborate with. I already know, for example, I have the support of FSD Africa in pushing this forward. I will be reaching out to you guys to see then from an, technical perspective, how can these capacity building sessions also empower us at county to ensure these regulations reflect the practical issues that we're trying to address. I think the second thing that I would also highlight is, Paula, as a lawyer, I think we're feared because things seem hard or misunderstood because legal language is slightly different from spoken English. One of the things that I'd be leaning on you and other lawyers next year is to really unpack what it means to have these draft policies which have been pending for so long. And you're right, Senior, when we have lots of paper, but that can't translate into action, a lot gets lost in translation, and then people choose to bypass the law to do what they want. So it becomes critical for lawyers to be involved in shaping the sustainability conversation as one of opportunity in a language that makes sense to everyone. And I think, Etta, one of the things that I'll be really leveraging, when it comes to you and your expertise with projects and end-to-end cycles is, how can I then approach developers, architects like yourselves, and other players within the built environment to really help them understand that we do not actually have a technical expertise issue. What we have is a relational expertise issue. If we're not talking to clients in a way that they see this as an opportunity, we'll not be preaching to those who need to be converted. And I think that's a big, big issue. And then Kennedy talked about several documents which may not be familiar to you guys. I want to assure you that I will be sharing that with you post the webinar, the documents mentioned, the incentive policy, and I believe there was something else that was mentioned. So both of those. And I think it's also critical to understand, we've had a challenge as the built environment because, and I think I mentioned this to you, Nashan, in our group discussion, the problem is everyone wants to work alone, and that doesn't make sense. If you collaborate, you come in with a stronger voice and you can move things together. And then as in a reactive market, we have to be proactive in shaping the opportunity. So I will be hoping that we can come together to create the challenges and the incentives we would want so that we can push it both at national and subnational level. Kennedy is modest, so I'll say it to you. Last year, 2023, was actually the year we made a lot of strides, both with his efforts and our efforts as KGBS to really put the built environment as a player in the sustainability conversation. It was because of our efforts that the built environment became a player at the Africa Climate Summit, the very first time ever at a regional climate conversation as a partner of an event of that magnitude. And then thereafter at COP, we got commitments for the built environment. Now, what does that mean for you? It means you have an opportunity as an individual to shape your practice or your expertise so that you can unlock opportunities for yourself. And as KGBS, we're more than happy to support you on this journey with our capacity building sessions. But as an entity, a lot of funding will be, getting to the market. So as KGBS, we will be looking to collaborate with our members and also other players and our friends like Nashan and David, Plana, David Gatumo and the same. And we're looking at collaborating to pitch for opportunities so that those opportunities can be realized at a Kenya market. And I just want to make sure that I answer everything. So I'm going to do a very quick run through of your comments. Anything else, I will definitely write to you. I see we have a participant from South Africa. Thank you so much for sharing your building technologies. We'll definitely share it with our members. And in terms of why can't we build sustainably, how are other countries doing it? I think, one, we have a greed issue and corruption issue, and that can only be done because that can only be, countered if we highlight sustainability as an opportunity. I think everyone believes the shortcut is the best way, and doing the right thing could be shortchanging yourself. So if we reshape this narrative to kind of convince people that the right thing is the smart thing, then we'll only see movement in the forward direction. In terms of sustainability being expensive and legislation being a lot, I think that's where we need to leverage the different professionals that I mentioned. So as lawyers, we need to unpack legislation in a way that's simple. In terms of sustainability being expensive, I would say that totally, depends on you. You have, a journey. Can you start with low-hanging fruits? If it's a low-hanging fruit, it's less expensive. But if you start off with a complex framework, it makes it very, very hard for you. And then also in terms of the varied challenges, you're right. Absolutely. A combination of economic, regulatory, and cultural issues definitely affect us as a country. But I think it's important for us to break down our issues into bits so that we're not overwhelmed. And then I think there's a comment around developers assuming that it's expensive. That's what we are going to demystify next year more intentionally. And I think reshaping the conversation to one of opportunity. In terms of the National Green Incentive Policy and the zoning laws, The discrepancy is an issue. I definitely agree. And that then means we have to come together to say what's working and what isn't and our proposed solutions. Remember, the government is already overwhelmed and they're looking for money and investment. So if we go and say things are not working, chances are they'll tell us to join the club of other people complaining. What we need to do is come up with a one-pager that says, these are the list of issues, these are our proposed solutions, and this is who we want to take along to give you those solutions. And of course, potentially, those solutions unlocking funding. In terms of the NEO plan, right, I agree. It was never adopted. And the problem is regulations do not exist. So again, I will be reaching out so that we can have those sessions, and then I will need you guys to really put pressure so that these regulations are taken up by the executive. Positions of professionals and communities are a huge one. I think professionals underestimate the role they play in shaping an agenda. But I would say, please don't do it individually. We have the power of lobbying the different players in the built environment. Could we do it as bodies? And that way we move as a block. Doing it individually rarely gets you anywhere. Kiambu is an animal that we can discuss on another day. During the protests, you know, I had videos made about the Kiambu issue with Tatu City. I'm not going to get into that because some of us got calls in the middle of the night saying we're causing havoc in different counties. But I will tell you this, havoc is great. It means then you've rattled the people you need to rattle, so don't stop. But I will tell you to potentially also put it in a formal way so that these things are some things that you can follow up on. Dr. Tosef, I will ensure that I share your details with Paula so that Paula can assist. Laura, Kiama, Njeri, Enjoy, and Tebi, thank you so much. And Madzikela, thank you so much. We're really happy that all of you are really happy with our contributions, both as a panel and as KGBS. We look forward to supporting you. Thank you so, so much. Nashon, you were a star, and so are your panelists. I thank you, and we look forward to supporting you in other sessions. Have a lovely afternoon, and that's it for us from KGBS. Bye.